right. From San Francisco, California, this is What's Left. I'm Eduardo Barca with Andy Lipson.
And it's a weekly what?
It's a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left.
Yeah.
Let's try that one more time.
No, that was perfect.
All right. Today we will be discussing the issue of climate change. I have been meaning to have this discussion because, because it's an important topic just in general, but it is also the topic that is most frequently being discussed during this past week, because California Governor Jerry Brown had a climate summit here in San Francisco, and I participated in not this yesterday, Saturday, but the weekend before, some of the climate protests against capitalism, against climate capitalism rather, because that's really what it is about. Many people were angry, and they were feeling that the summit really is just working around capitalism, trying to figure out ways to make climate, carbon footprint, and fossil fuel. All the protesters were upset that this summit really is just trying to work around capitalism, trying to work around making basically pollution legal, and pollution in a way that may be controlled and be allowed to be shared. And I was reading about how carbon caps are one way to curb pollution. It really isn't. It's not what people want. It's just a way to ostensibly buy a form of polluting the earth, and doesn't really put a stop to any climate pollution that really needs to happen at the acceleration that we are going at this moment. So my loss of art in articulating this, please help me out here.
No, also.
Anyhow, the point is that it's a very hot topic in these past 2 weeks.
No pun intended.
I just got it.
Funny. So
your assessment, your comment.
I mean, I think the climate summit called by Jerry Brown is a joke. Like, it's a bad joke. It's once again the Democratic Party playing politics and basically patting themselves on the back for essentially the politics of the Paris Accord, which is about carbon swapping, carbon caps. The impact of these policies really just means that we're going to pay some money to pollute elsewhere, and generally the people who pay the biggest price for it are the people who have refineries in their poor communities, and they're getting sick. So actually, at the Moscone Center, there was a demonstration of Native American people who were actually protesting Jerry Brown for his support of carbon caps and carbon swapping, basically saying that our people are being devastated by your policies. And so that's one of the hoaxes being pushed here, is that the Democrats have anything to say different than Trump. Trump's rejection of the Paris Accord is to me no worse than Democrats' adoption of the Paris Accord. Both of these things will do nothing to protect the environment from capitalism, and are both ways of essentially pushing the problem around into different terrains. One, the carbon swap and stuff like that is really just a way for, like I said, the poorest communities and poorest countries to essentially be the places where the most polluters go to pollute on the cheap. I think there was an estimate by the UN in 2010 that the 3,000 capitalist companies, 3,000 companies, do about $2.2 trillion worth of damage to the environment. That's not global warming damage. That's pollution. That's terraforming. That was poisoning of water, things like that. That was the kind of damage they were talking about, not warming change, but actual real effects happening to real people was estimated about $2.2 trillion. And they don't pay anything for that. It was estimated that profits would go down by a third if those companies actually paid for the damage that they were doing to the environment. So there's no doubt to me that capitalism and the capitalists are they have an incentive to destroy the environment because it doesn't fit anywhere on their ledger, on their balance sheet for debits and credits, for profits and costs and revenues. So I would just say that the climate summit that Jerry Brown's putting forward was political. It was an attempt for the Democrats to take the high ground around the environment when they have nothing to offer around the environment. Obviously, nor do the Republicans. So in that regard, yeah, I agree. It was a joke, and it's one we shouldn't fall for, and we should not believe them at all that they have any interest in doing anything to protect the environment. Their solutions are going to actually hurt people, generally people of color, generally poor people. Same old, same old.
Yeah, I should mention that there are lots of liberals that will disagree with us. And I want to point out that the Democrats this year have decided to lift the ban on fossil fuel companies from giving to give donations
right.
to now to the Democratic Party. So they are going to work with fossil fuel companies.
Can I say one of the?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
the things
We'll
is one of the things that the Native American demonstrators were saying was that the direct result of these policies that Brown is pushing, not just Brown but the Democratic Party, the capitalists actually are pushing these carbon swappings, was an increase in fracking that was going on as a result of that. And fracking definitely does known damage into the ground and leads to all sorts of pollution problems, which was highlighted by the struggle last year. Other Native Standing Rock. Yeah. So, sorry.
Yeah. No, I think this is one of the. You mentioned, or some would say it's climate racism, where poor communities, specifically also communities of color, are mostly impacted. A very good example here in the Bay Area, Richmond. In the East Bay of here, San Francisco, has there is a Chevron refinery, and when the Chevron refinery had an accident and they were releasing lots of smoke and fuel out into the atmosphere, lots of those communities were impacted, and their health effects they had a lot of health effects. This happens as well in Texas when the Hurricane Katrina was there as well. Many of the communities that were being served were mostly affluent communities rather than the communities that were impoverished or low-income communities, and mostly communities of color. So there is patterns that people choose to ignore. People just say this impacts everyone, but you can see where the refineries, where fracking happens, and it mostly happens in areas that people don't care about, or people won't say much, or they expect people won't say much.
Right, and actually in this country, a lot of native lands are being used as an oil speculation bonanza right now. So, and those people are going to face the direct influence of new ways of pulling oil out of the ground. And I guess where you finished?
No, go ahead. We have. I want to make sure we point out all the points.
I mean, I think it's important to say that this isn't say a climate issue per se. It's an environmental destruction issue. It's the fact that because the environment does not figure on the profit ledger of companies, they don't have to take into account, except to the extent that the state regulates them, and the state is again controlled by these corporations. So either looks aside at some of these things that it's doing to the environment. So the people who are facing these impacts aren't facing some long-term climate change impact. They're facing a direct impact of an immediate poisoning, of immediate pollution that's in their environment, that's creating asthma and things like that. The asthma that we see in the Bayview Hunter's Point isn't a result of global warming. It's a result of pollution being put directly into those communities by the like the naval shipyard here as well, right? And so it's really important for us to be specific about the kind of damage that is going on, because I think, for me, and I think I'm on the outside on this question. I actually believe there are questions that not just the oil company, but actual real scientists raise about what is actually creating the climate change, right?
You have questions.
I have questions, and I've read stuff about that, but I have no questions that the environment is being destroyed and that the impacts of the environmental destruction are being unfairly put on the backs of working people and people of color, the poorest people. But that's about pollution. That's about land development. That's about biodiversity. That's about what's happening in terms of the air quality in your cities. And the quality of the water you might be drinking. Rich will always, not always. Rich will be the most protected from those effects for the longest, compared to people who don't have that kind of money. So that's it. Is going, whatever is done to the environment, the effects will be faced by the poorest people in this world, and by workers in this world, not by the people who actually are producing these problems, and who are actually making money off of producing these problems.
Once again, I'm a little startled by Andy. You have questions.
I do.
What kind of questions? Andy, you had said something that I'm a little thrown off by.
Well, first off, I don't want to distract, because this is new for me, actually. For the longest time, I've been a person who would have said global warming was not up for debate. That is, that human intervention is creating global warming. But I have read some things not from people on the liberal background or left part. There's a scientist from San Francisco State, actually, who teaches at San Francisco State, who does not actually believe, who basically believes that that while it's true, there's evidence of overall warming going on, that he doesn't believe the evidence is there for showing that it's directly related to human put in CO2. And there's other scientists who believe that. So I'm not going to say that I know for a fact, but I'm going to say that this is not just an oil company versus the scientific community question, that there's a minority opinion within the scientific community who actually is concerned about the environment. Like this guy basically says, look, water levels, this is that guy from San Francisco State, water levels are a problem, but they're largely a problem because of the way irrigation is being done, and it's causing a lowering of the land levels, not so much a rising of the sea levels in some of these areas, or the loss of certain species was a result not of global warming, which was being attributable, but attributable to land, the way land was being developed and used by the capitalists in those regions. And when you used better procedures, they were actually able to recover some of the butterflies that they lost in regions. So this is a guy who's a naturalist saying these things. So this is not Chevron, and so the statement made by some of these scientists is they do believe there's an industry that's developing around greenwashing and carbon swapping, and to put this climate issue into simply a CO2 issue to justify some of the carbon swapping, carbon tax policies that are being used. I don't think that's the entire scientific community behind that, but that's the claim from some of these scientists. So I'm not going to say that I know, but I am going to say I think there's an open debate for me, there's now a question that I would need to pursue more about whether or not the rising temperatures we're seeing are a result of human intervention and rising CO2 levels that are put in by, and this other woman scientist, Judith Curry, was talking about how the largest greenhouse gas is water vapor. And that was like 20% greenhouse gas, and so and she had other stuff that she had said. So it gave me pause, and I do believe that I think there's a long tradition in science of operating by consensus, and that consensus has often been wrong. And some of the people who now I don't trust what Chevron would say, But when I see people who actually, I do believe, have a stake in trying to help the environment and are themselves in the scientific community, if they say something that is like, no, this is not as easy as you think, then I'm going to look more into it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to call myself a person who's like, oh, you all are wrong, who are saying climate change is due to human intervention. I am going to say I've read some things that give me questions about that, without making me question that capitalism is going to destroy the environment. I'm just not sure it's going to do it through climate change. It's either going to do it, well, probably the biggest way it's going to do it for humanity is, I think, nuclear war. That will be the biggest effect we will have on our environment. That will make it so that the humans probably can't live on here effectively. The other type of destruction is that we've been talking about is largely going to be felt by the rest of us before it's felt by the capitalists.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you agree that there is damage to the environment?
Of course. I mean, that's what we've been talking about. But global warming is one aspect of that. Like there's the loss of biodiversity. There's the pollution of our of our water. There is the erosion of certain like land redevelopment that's making certain species extinct. Deforestation. Things like that.
Yeah,
that's not a question.
Yeah,
that part isn't up for debate to me, at least. I mean,
I think when we talk about the environment, I think
the environment is not just climate.
Right. I was just going to say that sometimes we narrow it down to CO2 levels, mm-hmm. and the environment is a very broad term for just animal species where we live. Yeah, but I was just going. Yeah, you're right. But I'm saying like it includes animal species.
Yeah.
It includes lands and different endemic locations and biodiverse areas.
Right.
That you will not find this biodiversity in other areas.
Right.
Because it's just specifically to California or specifically to Mexico or specifically to a certain part of the world.
Yeah, extinction of certain species.
Yes.
But those things, the ones that are, this guy who was the San Francisco State was talking about how some of these species extinctions are a direct result of human intervention, but not a global warming effect, but deforestation, land redevelopment, things like that. So I think like we don't have to wait for this stuff to happen. It's actually already happened, and it's not something that's predicted to happen. It's like it's happening, and it can be stopped. I think his claim is that there's been almost a hyper focus on this area that he says, I'm not sure that this is, of all the problems we are facing, this is not the one he's worried about. And I think it's interesting that he says that.
Well, here I will lay out, just to be transparent, and I don't think I needed to do it, but when I'm referring to the climate change, when I'm referring to the environment, mostly when I say the environment, I'm referring to any link that is human caused.
Right.
Deforestation is not part of a cycle that happens over some periods of years like we have had in the past. It is something that has happened because of capitalism.
Yeah.
Because of the production for meat in Brazil to have the forest cut down to
boosted by IMF policies forcing these countries to pay back their stuff through development of these lands into places where they can have cows produce meat, right? So
yes.
Yeah.
Or even our agriculture is a very main is huge, right? Right now in where the hurricane is happening with the overflooding and everything, there are lagoons where feces, excrement of cows and pigs have been flushed into, and with the rising flood levels, with the rising rain and the flooding, they will spread over drinking water, and that is linked to human. I mean, who else would have put so many pigs in agricultural factory farms so that these pollute our lagoons, our lakes, our waters, our streams, our rivers, that leads ultimately everything into the ocean.
Nuclear reactors,
right?
What's happened with them in Japan in Chernobyl,
happened,
in the United States, 3 Mile Island.
So I don't know how this can be a conservative or liberal issue. This is something that we can see that clearly is affecting everyone, and it affects our drinking water. It affects our climate in the sense that if you cut too many trees, because actually there would be arborist out there that would say
Right.
that lumbering of trees is actually a positive thing, but at the rate and acceleration
Correct.
that does not allow for
Right.
other trees to emerge
Right.
and for those trees to regenerate themselves. That is all part of capitalism. And my concern is that all the scientists that are trying to gather up against climate change policies that are being dismantled currently under this administration, specifically this, because this is
Yeah.
what the topic is about, right? Not our topic, but the hot debate around these
Yeah.
past 2 weeks has been. My concern for them is that they're still trying to work around a system that is not functioning. I read an opinion piece in the New York Times that talks about how ultimately you can try to figure out how to vote for better policies, you can try to engineer better technology to help out the environment, you can do, but unless you change fundamentally the system that operates within everything, like an operating system that you're using for your computer or whatever, like unless you really change that whole system, there will be continuous exploitation.
Yep.
Because this is a capitalist system.
Yep.
And there will be, and we had an interview with an anarchist slash capitalist.
Your friend.
Yes, my friend.
I hope he's watching this episode.
It's funny, you like to tag Pope Francis as my friend, and you like to tag this anarchist capitalist as my friend, painting me as a weird person.
I'm just saying
that myself.
Okay.
I'm just making a joke.
It's fine. You got
Pope
me.
Francis and the capitalist friend of mine, these just happen to me.
These are his buddies. I think he hangs out with. He drinks with Pope Francis. What am I going to say?
But you know, he showed up in an interview that we had, and you know, we didn't delve into very specific topics with him.
Yeah.
We were kind of having a general interview
Yeah.
with him, but he had said that something that bothered me, that he had said exploitation can be a good thing. I was thinking about that later on when I went home. I can't seem to think of anything that where exploitation is a good thing. I studied permaculture, and the main components of permaculture is people care, earth care, surplus share.
Yeah.
Where you are trying to have an abundance,
Yeah.
not to exploit
Right.
limited resources.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, exploitation to me means use without consideration of any other factor other than something for yourself, versus the idea of using something in a cyclical way, in a way that's like, I'm going to use this, but I need to put something back to restore it as well, right? And you know, this is what we talk about when we talk about, original Native American cultures. And I'm playing a video game, Never Alone, that actually with my partner, and it actually is a video game about an Eskimo tribe that's seeing its world changed, but who has lived for quite some time with this notion of, whatever we take, we also respect, we also give back. I don't see any reason not to have that relationship with our environment.
Right, there is that taking of resources.
Yeah, but then you have to give back.
But exploitation is different.
Yeah, I mean, exploitation is just taking, and I think not doing anything in return, not doing something to restore what you've taken. So I agree. I'm not a fan of exploitation under any circumstances.
You even see it with Native Americans that they ate the buffalo, but they would allow them to breed over seasons.
I do believe that that is the nature of the kind of existence we'd have to have. We have to have a situation where we can decide what resources we're going to use and then figure out what we're going to do to restore them. The profit system does not allow that decision to be made, because it only decides what gets made. Like, capitalists can't decide on that. They have to basically be dedicated to profits. It's just, like you said, it's a systemic problem. I will say that in reading about the climate change stuff, because as much as I do have some questions about that specific area of whether or not the climate is being changed in relationship to rising CO2 levels produced by human activity. Not any of those other things. I have no question about those other things. That this fracking and the pollution, the wreck pollution. You've heard. I mean, you can measure it right there. But I have heard that certain people who are with the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Pollution, it's part of the climate change. The CC is climate change. Have actually thought of using solar radiation management techniques to, right? They're actually talking about geoengineering, talking about doing things to affect putting sulfates in the air to make it so that the sun does not come down does not come through into the greenhouse, or blocking it some way. I think those methods are I have real questions about those kinds of methods, like the idea of like affecting the weather through how much sun gets into the planet.
I heard the same thing.
Yeah, it's not just that some of these people who are fixating on CO2 are open to this carbon swapping stuff that I don't think works. They're also, some of them, not all of them, some of them are open to, because they think that the world is coming to an end as a result of this specific thing. They're open to doing a lot of geological and letting the scientists and the government do what it will to affect the weather.
Almost like those chemtrails.
Yeah, and there was stuff done in Viet Nam to try to seed clouds and things like that. So that to me is very worrisome. Like I don't think we should support that, and I think the fact that some people do is really misguided. So I do think we have to look at the entire picture. Capitalism doesn't allow that, but I'm not going to pretend that my position, I recognize that I've kind of walked down a rabbit hole on this question, because most people on the left would just be like, no, global warming, human-made, da-da-da-da. And I think there is a scientific consensus on that. I'm not coming out and saying, oh, you're all wrong. I am saying I have questions about it, and I think there are scientists who are not in the pocket of Chevron who have questions about it, and I need to look more into it.
So it is interesting how, not Chevron, it was Exxon. Exxon had climate scientists actually look into this, and they did find evidence. And this is a capitalist, but ultimately they were trying to disprove, and it couldn't find it, and then they denied the evidence and tried to hide it and put it away. But we can enter, I think, into a debate about that another time. I'm really interested in doing this topic about climate and capitalism, because we both know that we both agree. You're as a socialist.
We both agree that
we both agree that policies, summits, accords, treaties are not the solution.
That's certainly under capitalism, and we also agree.
Yes, under capitalism.
That the environment is definitely at risk as a result of the profit system. I agree with that. What the nature of those risks are, I have some questions about, as it relates specifically to the question of that long-term effect of climate change, the ice melting on the Antarctic shelves, and water levels rising as a result of that. Like I said, other people are saying some other things. Like this other guy had written that the Antarctic shelf on one was receding on the west and rising in the east. So he was like, okay, it's a mixed bag. And I'm just like, that I need to know more. And I would say that so that's what I would say. But we do both agree that things like the Paris Accord, things like the climate summit that's being led by Jerry Brown, I think we both agree are kind of smoke and mirrors operations to try to say that they're doing something about something they have no intention of solving, because they can't solve it under capitalism.
Now, maybe this fits in here, Andy. I don't know, but this sounds a lot like when one of my friends talks about variables, and there's so many variables to things. Even if you find patterns you make a consensus statistical analysis. I don't know, maybe this doesn't belong here, so I'm just stating that now, but it is challenging when you, like, even on the topic of racism or climate change, and even evolution, where you'll find that there is overwhelming patterns that exist within this theory. And I think I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think that I'm by the side of, if there is overwhelming evidence, a consensus, most of the time, if you find that the variable seems to pop up there in a statistic or pattern, that should be an indicator that we should look into. Will we know for sure 100% that theoretically, 100% that this is the truth? I do not know.
Yeah.
But theoretically, if you look at some indicator that continue to persist within any statistical pattern, I am for that evidence pattern than against it. That's how my position around it is.
I agree
I'm
with
not
that,
saying
yeah.
anything about it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just something that keeps continuing to come up about challenging climate change,
Yeah.
scientific research, challenging statistics on racism, challenging evolution. It is something that constantly is a discourse, like the dialogue around these things. So.
It is true that you have to figure out what's up and what's down. I mean, that is true, and it's not always easy. Again, I'm in flux on this question, but I would make a distinction between consensus and evidence. Those are different things.
Mm-hmm.
100 scientists,
when
Einstein came out with his theory of relativity, 100 scientists came out and said he's wrong. There was a consensus against him.
Yes. Yeah.
But he asked, well, why did they need 100? That was the question he asked. Why did they need 100? So consensus is not the same thing as evidence.
Well, let me make myself clear.
But hold on.
Just because you took that.
Well, let me just finish.
I meant to say, like, if you find overwhelming.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like
majority that is finds evidence separately in different parts.
Well, I'm just saying that I'm starting to find other scientists who are not connected, who are not connected to these political, like the oil companies, who have other evidence and who have a different look at the same evidence and say, oh, they're saying that a causation, the correlation is a causation, and they're saying I don't see that's as true. I just think each case has to be looked at in its case by case basis. Like I said, I'm right now at a place where I would need to look into this more. I'm not saying that I have proof or even am convinced that those scientists who are questioning the human cause of climate change are right. I'm just saying, there is some evidence that I have not heard before that I can't immediately know how to respond to. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I have seen how this issue has been politicized by more like liberal side and used for their own cause and to make CO2 like the catch-all for solving this problem. Mm-hmm. And I think there's reason, and people are getting rich off of doing this. Mm-hmm. And so it does give me some reason to have pause. And I also, so I think, but I don't have any question that there's damage right now and has been done by the system against the environment at the expense of working people. That's why we need to have a revolution. That's another reason. But my biggest fear at this point isn't global warming per se. It probably would be like a nuclear destruction. If you were going to ask me some sort of global catastrophic thing that will be caused by humans, I have to look more into this global warming stuff, to be honest, because I've read some stuff that was new for me, and so it's causing me on that specific issue to have some questions.
I think for the younger generation, my generation and after me, the ones that are younger than my generation,
the generation that comes after me.
No, you don't.
Yeah,
which is a generation younger than me. After me, right?
Yes.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Before is antepasado, of course.
All
before,
right.
after. Yeah. Okay. The generation after me, around this, it is a liberal topic, mostly, right? It shouldn't be. Environment shouldn't be, but climate change, global warming.
Okay.
Topic.
Okay.
And the politicizing of it. And what I want to get at is that young people have been starting to hear this a lot, and they're really concerned. I think that it gives such anxiety to the following generation that I want to say something about that, which I think is about in the same field as it said around what you are also saying. I do not think that climate change will destroy the Earth.
No.
Personally, because I have read lots of, I have read on this topic, and I do not think that climate change will destroy the Earth. I think the Earth is very resilient. I think we forget how immense this universe is and how powerful this planet has been without us. And humans are like a disease that, like, yes, but we are not as powerful as this planet. We are not as powerful as this universe. And so I think that it will not be the destruction of the planet, of the environment. I think it will be ultimately destroying us slowly. But really, where I am afraid, which you just brought up, this is why I'm saying this, is really World War III. Destruction, accelerated destruction of the environment. And still the planet will survive, but will kill us at an accelerated pace, will damage us, our water systems, chemical weapons attacks will kill us. And it is said that there are like 90% of our bodies are already contaminated with some sort of chemical within our body already. So I do think that we are destroying ourselves, but the planet itself is resilient and has survived, and there will be other species that will emerge from this, I think. But personally, I'm not concerned so much about, if we reach the Celsius, this is going to hit a lot of liberals the wrong way. But there is if you reach 350 degrees something, 350 parts
per million in terms of how much CO2 levels,
it's still before, if you reach that part, after that you will not be able to save the Earth, because that is, how do you call it? Like, that is after that
tipping point.
The tipping point. Thank you. Thank you. Your language is so necessary.
Sorry.
All right, 4 languages in and still trying.
Right.
So, what I want to say is that I'm not so much concerned, and that is going to hit a lot of liberals the wrong way.
No.
I'm more concerned about our race towards authoritarian governments trying to colonize all countries and to try to create 2 form of capitalistic governments that rule the entire planet, and they'll ultimately be a result of wars and proxy wars. That is my major concern. But climate change is important as we can work around these other issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine most everyone recognizes that the planet will survive. More likely, some level of species would survive, whether it would be global warming or nuclear war or anything. The planet's going to be fine, But I do think the question is what's it going to be like for humans who are living on this, and particularly the inequities that will be felt between humans who have access to resources, money to afford resources, versus those who don't. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a completely unfair, and it's that separation, it's that inequality that I think is really driving people's anxiety around these questions. And so, if global warming is a reality, if those minority scientists who I'm reading about are wrong, and global warming, then the fear is not that the planet. I think the fear is that the planet's going to be destroyed. The fear is, again, that the rising water levels will again affect the poorest the most and things like that, and we need to do something to stop that. Mm-hmm. And I think I understand that. I'm just saying that in this specific area of the myriad environmental attacks that capitalism puts to the earth that makes it harder for us to live on it, I'm having some questions about that one. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't invalidate all the others. It's I have to look more into it, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But I do agree with even the climate change people who say if these impacts really do happen, that they're going to be unfairly felt, mm-hmm. and they're not going to be felt evenly, and there is an immediate need to do something to stop this system from making it impossible for us to live well on this planet, and that I do think there's a real urgency around that, no matter what you think about climate change.
And there are flaws as well, inequality flaws around summits as well. When you ask for countries to do the same load of work that capitalist first world countries have to do as well.
Right.
When the first world countries are the ones that are exploiting the earth more and are producing
most of the pollutants, most of
contamination
the things,
that happens into this planet and
Yep.
our environment.
Yep.
So when you are asking a small Fijian island to do almost the same amount of work as the country of the USA, that doesn't show how you are being fair, and it is being expected for countries in Central America, for countries that have not contributed to, I will say, for even liberals, how this does not make sense, CO2 gas emissions. If it's being measured, it is not the same level of CO2 gas emissions for the countries that are being measured, that are releasing into the environment. So if the USA and Europe have the highest amount in Australia, and yet it's being expected that countries meet the same sort of expectations to hinder climate change.
Right.
And so that's another inequality.
Yep. Yeah. And the environment is a political issue. It's just, it's being politically used by governments, U.S. government, European governments, as, I think, a tool to compete over who is going to pay the most, and who's going to pay the least for essentially not protecting the environment, and for fooling people into thinking you are doing something about the environment when all you're really doing is moving around a kind of a resource shell game to see where the pollution is going to take place, and who will have to pay for it the most. So that, to me, is not the type of politics we need to solve this. We need the politics of working class revolution, takes down capitalism, and workers deciding, and workers coming up with their own solutions for how we're going to figure out how to live on this planet in a sustainable sort of way, which is going to, I personally believe, if we were able to control it, we're going to have to start sounding a lot more like that Eskimo, group that I'm, playing this video game about. I think people are going to have to think more like that than
somehow video games and Eskimos do not sound well together.
It's called Never Alone, so it's really cool.
All right. I just somehow did not like those two connections. Eskimos.
No, it's a video game that actually
I'm being very
they're actually being interviewed, and they're talking about how they live and things like that. So
yeah, I think that exploitation is when we were talking with Jake, again going back to that, and you were going back, circling around back to that issue, that when he was referring to exploitation, I think he has been confusing it possibly with like how people have always gotten natural resources, how we've always, yes, we have used natural resources, we have, but in a sustainable way that allowed for things to regenerate, allowed things to reproduce, allowed for breeding times to be given enough time to have an access for us to eventually take. And that is what ecologies work.
Correct.
Ecosystems work.
Yes, right.
Lions eat zebras, and zebras produce.
Yeah.
And then eventually you have an excess, and you have an excess of lions, and then when you have when you don't have a lot of zebras, and you have the pride goes down as well. It's just part of ecology, right? But we don't work that way. So, yeah, I think that exploitation that exploitation is a good thing. The argument that exploitation is a good thing is confused with that we have used resources, natural resources, but in a sustainable manner.
Well, we haven't done it. We haven't done it in a sustainable way in quite some time.
I mean, we have not done it because we are under this system of capitalism.
Yeah. So, anyway, we took some surprising turns.
Yeah, this is not the way that I had planned. And
no, I
you
understand.
Had taken me. I had prepared sort of a liberal agenda here.
Yes, I did some reading. And here's what I read, and like I said,
cars polluting and more electrical cars and everything. Now I was planning to talk about like the summit and the protesters.
Yeah.
But
But I'll put a few
I
links.
improvised.
I'll put a few links down for things that I looked at, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on this. This is new stuff for me. But I'm starting to change. I have an open mind on this question, as it just specifically around global warming. Human-made global warming. That's what I mean.
And I think that I appreciate the very diverse crowd that was out on that Saturday, because there were people that were really upset that there isn't more being done. There were Native American tribes that showed up after Standing Rock that happened.
Right.
And that was ultimately, what would you call it? What word would you use? That is ultimately shut down, completely silenced the indigenous tribes there.
Yeah, some wanted an invitation into the summit and they weren't allowed. Not just to protest, but to be participants. So
how hypocritical is that?
Yeah. So,
yeah,
we're done this week. All right. Next week, I think we're talking about my friend Bruce, who's a socialist.
Can you tell me just a brief? Who is Bruce?
He is he's a longtime activist. He's written a few books. One about the farm workers' struggle back in the 60s and 70s that he was both a participant in, and he's done a lot of research around that. He's been an activist for 3 decades at least, maybe more. He'll say more about that. But he's a socialist. I think he would describe himself as a Maoist, but we'll see what he says. And he has his own idea about what socialism's about. That I thought might be good to do an interview, based both on his ideas about how the world is organized, but also maybe to contrast that to. I'm going to ask him to look at what I was talking about in terms of socialism, and he might have some differences about that, and I'd be interested in hearing those things.
All right, so you'll have an interview next week.
Yeah.
And for everyone that is interested, please support us. And by sharing this, ultimately that will gain more followers or more audience members. We're not doing this for clickbait. We really want an honest dialogue. And we ask that you please review us and make a comment if you want to say anything.
Definitely comments.
Or message directly to Andy.
Yeah, or comments on the YouTube or iTunes. I think you can kind of do it through the blog posts or things like that. So I would definitely like that. So until next week.
Yeah, until next week.
All right, bye-bye.
Ciao.